There's a question I've carried for most of my adult life, and I want to put it to you plainly before we go any further. It isn't the question of whether you're awake. Almost everyone believes they're awake. Ask any man on the street, and he'll tell you he sees clearly, thinks for himself, knows who he is. No, the harder question, the honest one, is this: how far have you actually come, and how much of the road still lies ahead of you that you haven't even seen yet? My name is Walter. I've spent a long time watching people, not from a stage, not from behind a pulpit, but up close, across kitchen tables, in hospital waiting rooms at 2 in the morning, in the strange, heavy quiet that settles over a house after a funeral, when the casseroles have stopped coming and the person has to figure out how to live again. And one thing I noticed, slowly over many years, is that the soul does not wake up all at once. It wakes the way a man wakes on a cold winter morning. First the eyes open, but the mind stays heavy and thick. Then the body stirs and immediately resists, pulling the blanket back up. And then finally, if he's willing, the clarity comes, and with it, the strength to actually rise and meet the day. What I want to give you today is something like a map. 9 stages, 9 recognizable places the human soul passes through on its way from sleep to genuine awakening. I'm not handing you this map so you can race through it and check the boxes. I'm handing it to you so you can find yourself on it, so you can stop mistaking the patch of ground you're standing on for the destination. And just as important, so you can stop punishing yourself for not having arrived somewhere you were never meant to skip ahead to. Because here is what I've come to understand after all these years of watching. The chosen are not the ones who arrive first. The chosen are the ones who refuse to stop walking. Keep that with you. We'll come back to it. Let's begin where everyone begins. The first stage is sleep that does not know it's asleep. This is the hardest place of all to describe, because the people living in it cannot hear the description. A man here lives entirely inside his reactions. Something happens to him, he responds. Someone wounds him, he wounds back, often before he's even decided to. He wants a thing, he chases it. He fears a thing, he runs and hides. There is no gap anywhere between the thing that happens and the way he answers it. No small, quiet space where a question might live. He calls all of this living. He might even call it being true to himself. But there's no real self there yet. There's only a bundle of inherited reflexes, habits he absorbed from his father and his mother, and the wounds of his childhood, all of it wearing his name and walking around in his body. I spent more years in this stage than I would like to admit to you. The strange mercy of it is that it doesn't hurt the way the later stages hurt. The pain of sleep is dull and constant, like a noise so steady you've stopped hearing it. You ache, but you don't know you're aching. And so you blame. You blame the world, the people closest to you, your bad luck, the economy, your ex, your boss, your parents. It never once occurs to you that the trouble might be running directly through the center of your own chest. Scripture has a phrase for this exact condition: eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear. People treat that like an insult. It isn't. It's a precise description of a man living entirely on the thin surface of his own life, never once suspecting there are depths beneath him he's never visited. The second stage almost always arrives through pain, and not pain you chose. Pain that breaks in uninvited, kicks the door down, and sits in your kitchen. Something collapses. A marriage you thought was solid, a career you'd built your whole identity around, a body that suddenly betrays you, a belief you'd staked everything on that turns out to be hollow. And for the first time, that dull, constant ache you'd stopped noticing sharpens into something white and sharp that you absolutely cannot ignore anymore. This is the stage of the first crack. The hard shell of automatic living splits open, and through that split, for the very first time in your life, real light gets in. It's uncomfortable. I want to be honest about that. Most people hate this stage and spend enormous energy trying to seal the crack back up, to caulk it over, to get back to the comfortable sleep they knew before. But here's the thing nobody tells you. You cannot unknow what the crack reveals. Once you've seen, even for half a second, that your life is not working the way you'd always assumed it was, a small voice starts to whisper underneath everything. What if the problem isn't only out there? What if some of it is in here? Think of Job, sitting in the ashes of everything he'd lost, scraping his open sores with a broken piece of pottery. 3 friends came and sat with him, and each one offered a tidy, reasonable explanation for why this had happened to him. You sinned. You deserved it. Repent, and it'll reverse. And Job refused every single one of them. He sat there in the rupture, in the raw, unexplained wound of it, and he would not accept a cheap answer just to make the discomfort stop. That refusal, that willingness to stay in the question rather than grab the first explanation that lets you go back to sleep. That's the doorway out of stage 2. The third stage is the awakening of the witness, and I want you to slow down with me here, because most people pass right over the significance of this one. For the first time, something genuinely new is born in a person. You begin to notice yourself, not just your circumstances, yourself. You catch yourself in the middle of anger, and for half a second, you actually see the anger instead of only being swallowed by it. You hear your own voice complaining out loud, and something quiet in the back of you steps back and listens, almost like a stranger overhearing you. A space opens up between you and your own reactions, and in that space, this is the miracle of it, for the first time in your life, you have a real choice. The wise across every tradition have pointed at this same strange emergence. The Hebrew scriptures speak of the spirit of a man searching the inner parts, the deepest rooms of him. There is a part of you that can stand back and watch the rest of you. And when that watching part finally wakes up, you are no longer simply a passenger being carried wherever your impulses drive. You've moved, however clumsily, into the driver's seat, even if you don't yet have the faintest idea how to drive. I remember the night this happened to me, or at least the night I noticed it had already been happening. I was in the middle of an argument I had had 100 times before. The same tired script, the same rising heat, the same wounded pride I always defended like it was something holy. And right in the center of it, a quiet thought arrived, almost amused, almost gentle. Walter, you're doing it again. You always do this. And I stopped. Not because I'd won, not because she'd conceded the point. I stopped because, for the first time in my life, I had seen the man having the argument. I walked outside and stood in the dark of the backyard for a long, long time. Something had shifted in me, and I could not have put a single word to what it was. But nothing was ever quite the same after that night. And I'll tell you what I've learned about this stage in the years since. The witness is fragile when it first wakes. It flickers. You'll have whole days where it goes dark again, and you're right back to being swallowed whole by your reactions. No space, no choice, just the old machine running on its own. That's normal. Don't despair over it. A muscle you've never used before doesn't get strong in a week. What matters is that the watching part has stirred it all, because once it has stirred even once, it can never again be fully convinced that it doesn't exist. You've felt it now. You know it's in there. The rest is just learning to call on it more often, until one day you realize it's awake more than it's asleep. The fourth stage is the hardest of all the 9, and it's the one where most people turn around and walk back the way they came. I call it the confrontation, because once the witness inside you is awake, it starts seeing things you would very much rather not see. The witness is honest, almost brutally so. It has no interest in protecting your image of yourself. It shows you your patterns, the way you manipulate the people around you when you're frightened, the way you abandon and go cold when you've been hurt, the resentment you've been carrying for years and calling righteousness, the stubborn pride you've been calling principle. This is the stage where you finally come face to face with your own shadow, and I promise you, it does not flatter you. A great deal of spiritual talk skips right over this part because it doesn't sell. Nobody wants to hear a man say, the next thing that's going to happen to you is that you'll be horrified by what you find inside yourself. But it's true, and dodging it is exactly the reason so many people stall out and never go further. They want the light without paying the cost of seeing what the light exposes. Consider Peter, bold, loud, the one who swore he'd die before he'd ever deny his Lord. And then there he is, hours later, warming his cold hands over a stranger's fire, swearing 3 separate times that he never even knew the man. And then the rooster crowed, just as he'd been told it would, and the scripture says he went out and wept bitterly. That bitter weeping is stage 4. That's a man seeing himself clearly, maybe for the very first time, and the sight of it breaking his heart wide open. But here is the part you must not miss. Peter did not stay in the betrayal. The weeping was not the end of his story. It was a passage he had to walk through to get to everything that came after. If you find yourself somewhere in this confrontation right now, if you've been seeing things about yourself lately that make you wince, then hear me very carefully. The fact that you can see your own darkness is not proof that you are worse than other people. It is proof that you have finally woken up enough to look. The sleeping man never weeps over himself. He can't. It would never even cross his mind that there is anything there to weep over. Your grief over your own failings is not a sign of how far you've fallen. It's a sign of how far you've already climbed. The 5th stage is surrender, and I need to be very precise with this word because it's been so overused and abused that it's nearly lost its meaning. Surrender is not giving up. It is not lying down in the road and letting life roll over you. Surrender is the precise moment you finally stop fighting reality as it actually is. You've seen your patterns now. You've exhausted yourself trying to fix them by sheer force of will, gritting your teeth, white-knuckling your way toward being a better person. And finally, something in you lets go of that desperate effort to control everything. The outcome, the people, the timeline, the carefully maintained image of yourself. You've been defending your whole life like a fortress. There's a deep paradox buried in here, and the strongest, most capable people resist it the longest. The control you've been gripping so tightly was never actually yours to begin with. The breath in your lungs right at this moment arrived without asking your permission, and one day it will leave the same way. When you finally admit, all the way down, how little you actually run, something that's been clenched tight your entire life begins to loosen. The gospel shows us Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, on his knees in the dirt, sweating, genuinely asking for the cup of suffering to pass him by if there were any other way, and then surrendering anyway. Not my will, but yours. That single sentence is the hinge the whole story turns on. It is not weakness. Make no mistake. That took more raw strength than all the miracles put together. I learned what surrender actually means much later in life than I'd like to confess. And I learned it the way most people do, when I'd finally run completely out of other options. I had spent years trying to manage a situation in my family that simply could not be managed by me. I'd planned, I'd pushed, I'd lain awake constructing strategies at 3 a.m, and one night, worn down to nothing, I stopped, not in triumph, in exhaustion. I said out loud to the dark that I couldn't carry it anymore and I wasn't going to try. And I want to tell you something strange. The situation didn't change that night, but I did. The weight I'd been hauling around wasn't the situation at all. It was my refusal to accept that it wasn't mine to fix. The moment I set that refusal down, I could breathe for the first time in years. The 6th stage is where a real peace begins to grow in a person, but it's an entirely different peace than the one you spent your earlier life chasing. Back then, peace meant the absence of problems. You honestly believed you'd be at peace once the bills were finally paid, once the relationship settled into something stable, once the test results came back clean. But that peace was always borrowed money, always mortgaged against the next disaster waiting around the corner. The peace of the 6th stage doesn't depend on your circumstances at all. It's a deep stillness running underneath all the noise of your life, a quiet that holds steady even when the whole surface of your existence is rough and churning. I have sat at the bedsides of people in their final days who carried this peace, and I have sat with people who had every advantage the world can offer and had none of it. And I'll tell you, the difference had nothing whatsoever to do with how much they owned or how smoothly their lives had gone when you wrote it all down on paper. The ones who had peace were the ones who had stopped demanding that life be something other than what it actually was. There's a line in the letter to the Philippians about a peace that surpasses all understanding. And that word, surpasses, is the whole key. It doesn't make sense viewed from the outside. It can't be accounted for by the conditions of the person's life. It rises up from somewhere far deeper than conditions can ever reach. There's a man in the scriptures who shows me this peace more clearly than almost anyone. Paul, writing one of his warmest, most joyful letters, and writing it from a prison cell. Read it, knowing where he sat when he wrote it, and the whole thing changes. He talks about contentment in any circumstance, about having learned the secret of being full and being hungry, of having plenty and having nothing. Learned. That's the word that stays with me. He didn't arrive with that peace. He learned it the long way, the hard way, in places no one would choose. And I think that's the quiet promise hidden in the 6th stage. This peace isn't a temperament you're born with or without. It's something forged in people, slowly, by everything they walk through and refuse to let make them bitter. The seventh stage is the return of love, but love transformed into something it wasn't before. In our sleep, what we go around calling love is mostly need wearing love's clothing. We love people for what they give us, for how they make us feel about ourselves, for the empty places in us they manage to fill. It's transactional, even when we'd swear on our lives that it isn't. But something happens in a person after surrender. That need-driven grasping starts to loosen its grip, and a completely different kind of caring becomes possible. You begin to love people without requiring anything back from them. You begin to see them as they truly are, in their own right, rather than as instruments arranged for your comfort. This is the love the old text describes: patient, kind, not self-seeking, keeping no record of wrongs. I used to read that famous passage out loud at weddings and think it was a beautiful ideal. The way you'd admire a tall mountain you never seriously expected to climb yourself. Now I understand it altogether differently. It's not an ideal at all. It's a plain description of what love actually becomes once the demanding, grasping self finally quiets down and stops shouting. You cannot manufacture this love by trying harder, by straining for it. It simply grows on its own, in the cleared soil that surrender leaves behind. I've watched it happen in people. The hardest, most defended person you ever met, softening in their later years into something gentle they could never have forced into being. The eighth stage is service that flows out of fullness rather than out of emptiness. There's a kind of helping that comes from a wound. We give in order to be needed, in order to feel worthy, in order to quiet the nagging voice that keeps insisting we're not enough as we are. And then there's another kind, entirely, that comes from overflow, from a cup so full that it simply spills onto whatever happens to be standing nearby. The eighth stage is the second kind. You serve now not to earn anything, not to plug your own emptiness, but because giving has quietly become the most natural motion of a soul that has itself received so much. Think of the way Jesus knelt down and washed the dusty feet of men he already knew would scatter and abandon him before the night was over, including the one who had already arranged to sell him for silver. That is not service performed in hope of gratitude. There was no gratitude coming, and he knew it. It was service that poured out of a fullness those men were powerless to diminish, no matter what they did. And I've come to believe most of us spend the entire first half of our lives trying to fill ourselves up from other people, and then the whole second half, if we're fortunate and willing, slowly learning how to pour ourselves back out. The shift between those two motions is one of the surest signs I know that a soul has traveled a great distance. The ninth stage I approach carefully, and I'm going to be honest with you, because I'd rather tell you the truth about where I actually stand than perform an arrival I haven't earned. I am not certain I have fully reached this one. The ninth stage is union, the place where that long-held, exhausting sense of being a separate, defended, perpetually anxious self finally dissolves into something far larger than itself. The drop of water stops being terrified of the ocean because it remembers at last that it was always made of the very same water. The old saints called it the unitive life. It's the place where you no longer feel like a frightened fragment fighting alone for its own survival, but like one small living part of something vast and good that has been quietly holding you up the entire time, even through all the years you never noticed it. I've met perhaps 3 or 4 people in my whole life who I genuinely believe lived from this place. And I'll tell you something that might surprise you. They were not impressive in the way the world counts impressive. They were quiet. They had a steadiness in them that simply did not crack under pressure, and a kindness that asked for absolutely nothing in return. Being near one of them was like walking into a wide clearing after weeks lost in dense, tangled forest. You didn't want anything from them. You just didn't want to leave. That, I've come to think, is what the 9th stage looks like from the outside. And the ones who actually reach it almost never announce it. They're the last people who'd ever make a video about how awakened they are. Now, I told you at the start that this was a map, and I meant it, but I have to tell you something crucial about how maps of the soul actually work. Because if I don't, you'll misread this one, and it'll do you more harm than good. You do not pass through these 9 stages in a clean, straight line and then graduate with a certificate. You spiral. You'll touch the 8th stage on a good, clear morning and find yourself flung right back into the 2nd by dinner time, when something breaks and the old reflexes come roaring back. You'll taste real surrender on a Sunday and then spend the following month white-knuckling control all over again, like you never learned a thing. This is not failure. Hear me. This is exactly how it works for every single person who has ever walked this road. The spiral isn't a sign you're lost. The spiral is the actual shape of the path. And what makes you one of the chosen, and I use that word very deliberately because I know it's part of why some of you are here listening to me right now, is not that you've reached the 9th stage. It's that you refuse to stop moving toward it. The world is full of people sleeping peacefully in the 1st stage, perfectly content there. And there's a strange quiet I won't mock in that contentment. But you were not built for it. Something in you woke up, and it will not go back to sleep. And that restlessness you sometimes curse as your private burden is the very thing that marks you as set apart. The hunger itself is the sign. The dissatisfaction that won't let you settle for living on the surface is not a flaw in your design. It's the compass needle swinging north, pointing you toward home. I want to say one more thing before I let you go, and it's the thing I most want you to carry out of here with you. Wherever you found yourself on this map today, and I suspect each of you recognized your own location somewhere in these 9 stages, probably more than once, that place is not your verdict. It is not a judgment passed on you. It's simply your starting line for tomorrow. The man sitting in stage 2 as he listens to me is not behind the man in stage 7. He is exactly where the road has placed him, doing the only work that his stage requires of him, which is to let the crack stay open and refuse to seal it shut. The soul keeps no schedule but its own, and in all of human history, it has never once been successfully rushed. I've watched people in their late 70s make the great leap from sleep into the awakening of the witness, their whole face changing as it happened. And I've watched brilliant, gifted young people stall out for decades at the threshold of the confrontation, unable to bear the weight of what they saw waiting for them there. There is no age to any of this. There is no such thing as too late. As long as there is breath moving in your body, there is another stage ahead of you, and the one who designed this whole slow, patient unfolding is far gentler with your pace than you have ever once been with yourself. So here's what I'll leave you with, and here's where I genuinely want to hear from you. I've laid out 9 stages, but I've described every one of them from the outside, the way an observer standing at a distance would. What I cannot see from here is where you actually are tonight, in the privacy of your own life. So tell me, and don't tell me which stage you wish you'd reached by now. Tell me, as honestly as you can manage, where you suspect you really stand. Which of these 9 did you feel a jolt of recognition reading? The kind that's almost uncomfortable because it names something true you've been carrying without words? Write it down below. Not for me, for yourself. There's a particular quiet power in saying it out loud, even to strangers in a comment thread. This is where I am, and I am not done walking. Name your stage, and then keep walking. The next one is always closer than you think.